hours earlier. 20 minutes later, the line between the two vessels snapped. At 1800 hours, the Pacific indicated that she was ready to make a second attempt at towage. At about the same time, word was received that a second, larger tug was on her way. For a brief moment, it seemed all would be well. But the second attempt at towage proved more difficult. The line was not made fast until 2055. Meanwhile, an attempt to anchor the Imoko Cadiz had proved unsuccessful. Less than 10 minutes after the second attempt at towage had begun, the Imoko Cadiz ran aground. The hull was damaged, and the cargo of crude oil began to run into the sea. Shortly after 2200, the tow line from the Pacific again snapped. Only at 23:26, some 14 hours after the steering gear had failed, did the master of the Imoko Cadiz finally send out an SOS message. The official Liberian inquiry into the Imoko Cadiz disaster was a lengthy and expensive business. But it concluded that there had been a number of mistakes and errors of judgment, any or all of which could have been avoided. In particular, the actions of the ship's master were of crucial importance in shaping the course of events. In the first instance, he appeared to fail to appreciate the grave danger to which his ship had been exposed. Being adrift in rough weather, with no means of steering and so near to the coast, should have been recognized for the perilous circumstances they were. The inquiry also concluded that the master showed a strange and lamentable reluctance to assume responsibility for his vessel in deciding what steps should be taken. The master was also criticized for his inexcusable delay in calling for assistance. An urgent call for a tug should have been made substantially earlier in the proceedings. The final conclusion was that the master had been guilty of gross dereliction, and he was suspended from duty for 3 years. The ship's owners, in a subsequent U.S. court case, were held to be liable for damages in incident. If the judgment stands, damages will certainly be in hundreds of millions of dollars. With the benefit of hindsight, it may seem too easy to realize exactly what the master should have done in these exceptional circumstances, and it's not clear that anything he could have done would have saved the ship. But a central issue was the definition of a master's responsibilities and powers to act. Masters are often reluctant to call for assistance or agree a salvage contract without first consulting their owners. This is understandable, but it should be recognized that the master has the authority and responsibility to take whatever action he thinks is necessary to save his ship, crew, and cargo without reference to anyone else. All responsible shipping companies should back his right to the full to make these decisions in an emergency. The master is the man on the spot. He is the only person normally who can assess the danger he's in. If he does decide he has time to contact his owners, they may be looking out of the window at a sunny, peaceful day on the other side of the world, while around him the storm rages. It's vital, therefore, that he communicates graphically and unambiguously the circumstances and the dangers. The master also should have nothing to fear by putting out a general distress call as early as possible. If a salvage contract is accepted and it transpires that the ship was in no danger, the size of any salvage award would reflect this. And because the insurers will in any case pay the award, any cost to owners will be mitigated by insurance arrangements. But the overall burden could be substantially increased by inaction. However, it's not only in the teeth of an emergency that the principle of decisive action by the master in accordance with his responsibilities applies. The Marion case may seem like a simple accident, but the background to the case shows otherwise. Once again, a number of errors of judgment paved the way for a financial disaster. And again, the conduct of the ship's master was central to the course of events. The reason why the Marion's anchor severely damaged the Ekofisk pipeline is perhaps extremely obvious. there was no indication on the ship's charts that the pipeline even existed. Although the master had been provided with up-to-date charts, he was not using them. A year before the pipeline disaster, a routine safety check had revealed flaws in the Marian's chart correction procedure. It showed that the master had been lax on this matter for many years. The findings were sent to the ship's managers with appropriate recommendations for urgent improvements. In the event, the company wrote a letter to the Marian's master reminding him of his duty to update his charts. Up-to-date charts were requisitioned by the master, but not used. Only when the Marian's anchor hit the Ekofisk pipeline did the master's failure to carry out his responsibilities become painfully apparent. In the event, his company was as a result landed with a massive claim. The court found that the company was legally responsible for failing to take more positive action after the safety check warning. Although updates had been provided to the ship, the court decided the managers had not ensured that they were being used. As a result, they were unable to limit their liability and became responsible for the full amount of damages. The Marian case underlines the vast financial sums at risk in shipping accidents. Lawsuits can be lengthy and time-wasting. The adverse publicity surrounding a shipping disaster can further affect the company's trading position and performance. That's why in shipping, there has to be a high premium on avoiding mistakes and disasters. Recourse to the law or arbitration has become more frequent in the present tight market conditions. One reason the lawsuits are long and expensive is the complexity and variety of documentation involved in shipping. A master needs to familiarize himself with the terms and conditions of the various contracts under which his vessel sails and carries goods. Charter parties, bills of lading, insurance, classification certificates. He needs to understand the division of responsibilities in these contracts and actions required from him under the warranties given and what procedures to follow when things go wrong. And this provides our first two golden rules. Understand the division of responsibilities. Follow the correct procedures. The stevedore damage clause in a charter party is a good illustration, as the following three examples show. Each of the three damage clauses covers the same broad area of responsibility, but there are considerable differences in the terms under which the master must act. The first example requires the master to advise the charterers of stevedore damage to his vessel as soon as possible after an incident has occurred. He must also issue a written notice of the damage claimed to the party responsible for causing it. The second example requires the master to advise the charterers of the damage within a fixed time limit, 12 or 24 hours. He must also obtain written acknowledgement of the damage from the party responsible. The third example sets more severe demands. As before, it requires the master to report the event to charterers and obtain written acknowledgement of responsibility. But it also requires him to make a survey of the damage to define and estimate its extent. In fact, all three damage clauses refer to the same ship, a vessel that was chartered, subchartered, and then subchartered again. So it's important to know which set of rules applies at any one time. Under all three charter parties, failure to comply with the terms of the clause could result in the ship's owners having to pay. In practice, it's not always easy to comply with requirements of this kind. A stevedore will often be unwilling to accept liability, let alone admit it in writing. A lengthy argument could delay the ship, resulting in further expense. And this brings in the commercial understanding of the master. Often he will have to weigh the commercial consequences of his actions even when he is on good legal ground, and simply do his best to protect his owner's position without unreasonably delaying the ship. Difficulties with the vital bill of lading illustrate this balance well. A ship loaded crude in the Gulf and the charter party required the bill of lading to be signed as presented. The bill with the shipper's quantity figure on it was duly presented to the master for signature. He believed from the ship's figures that the quantity loaded was less than claimed in the bill of lading. The master signed, but in order to try and protect his owner, he wrote a protest note to the shipper. The cargo was sold mid-voyage, and the new consignee sued the owner for the value of the shortage on delivery. They had not been notified of the short loading. The owners tried to recover from the charterers. They disclaimed responsibility because they had not been notified either. The lesson is clear. The master had acted correctly in making his note of protest to the shippers, but it should have been copied to all the known interested parties, together with a request to notify any other party that became involved in the transaction. And it's important to note that the owners were at risk for the delivered value of the shortage, not just the freight element. This liability could wipe out all their earnings from the voyage. This example brings out our third golden rule. Document everything and send copies to all parties. The case of Turner versus Japan Lines centered on who was responsible for the badly loaded cargo that caused injury to the stevedore at the discharge port. It may seem that blame should lie entirely with the stevedores who loaded the plywood in Japan, but the court argued that it was impractical to leave longshoremen to the mercies of foreign stevedores. Rights which may exist in theory would in general produce no practical form of redress. Instead, the court ruled that it was the duty of those on board the vessel, and therefore the master, to protect Mr. Turner from the concealed dangers in the hold. The exercise of reasonable care, it decided, could have corrected the problem at the loading stage. Alternatively, if the master had given a warning to the discharging stevedores, then this could have provided a defense to the claim. In the Turner case, the court ruled that although the ship's owners were liable, they were able to recover from the time charterers. Under some charter parties, such redress may not have been possible. Also, cases may take years to be heard, by which time a charterer may have gone out of business or be otherwise impossible to pursue. So once again, the master bears a heavy responsibility to stop unpleasant and expensive situations developing. The master is the responsible agent not only of the carrier, but also as bailee of the cargo. He must exercise reasonable care independently of his contractual responsibilities. Cases such as the Omoko Cadiz, the Marion, or Turner v. Japan Lines illustrate some of the more dramatic consequences of a master's actions or inactions. Many other aspects of shipping are more routine, but they may be no less important to the financial success of a shipping operation. In the next 3 programs, we'll be looking in more detail at masters' commercial responsibilities. But for the moment, let us recap on the general principles, the golden rules, which are, as we have seen, applicable at all times. That the master should understand the division of responsibilities under the various contracts that govern the shipping adventure. That he should understand the correct procedures to be followed in all situations. That he should document everything clearly and thoroughly, making sure that copies go to all relevant parties. The actions a master takes in key areas of responsibility can have major financial consequences for his company. As the oil-polluted beaches of Brittany showed all too clearly, in the business of shipping, mistakes are a luxury that no one can afford.